Now, please welcome LGBTQ Plus Victory Institute President and CEO, Mayor Anise Parker, to the stage for the Hall of Fame Awards ceremony.
We're in the home stretch, and I'm glad for those of you who have stayed in the room, because I really love this part of our conference, and I think it's important. Back in 2021, LGBTQ Plus Victory Fund celebrated its 30th anniversary. You know, 30 years is no small event. Yeah, by the way, my wife and I, 33 years, another month. So, it's not a small event, it's something to celebrate. And the main question we kept coming back to was, how do we honor not only Victory's impact over the years, but the rich history of LGBTQ plus public service? We wanted to highlight the leaders who've contributed so much, the leaders who've inspired so many, to think about how we can contribute to the fight for progress in our communities and around the world. And these leaders are candidates, elected and appointed officials, people who have made a change in the political process. Now, one of the things that frustrated me was how much of our history we were losing. Victory resurrected the story of Kathy Kozashenko, who was the first openly gay elected official in the United States. Now, there have been others, and it's not that I object to the fact that we talk about Harvey Milk, because Harvey Milk is an amazing person and was a martyr for the cause, but he wasn't the first. It is important to capture the first, because you also need to know who's the next and the next. And the way we decided to bring some of this history to life, to preserve these inspiring legacies, these stories, these people, was we created the LGBTQ Plus Political Hall of Fame to be a public resource that honors the leaders who shattered lavender ceilings and had outsized impact on the fight for LGBTQ plus representation. We also created a website, prideandprogress.org, prideandprogress.org, A-N-D, nothing fancy, prideandprogress.org, so that everyone could have an access to our history. And just as an aside, go in, take a look, add to it, give us more information, help us find these forerunners, these foremothers and forefathers, before they are lost to our history. In 2023, and we did this in 2021 for our 30th anniversary, and we've been adding to it, and we started with 10, and we've been adding 2 or 3 since then, and our 2023 honorees join a very impressive cohort. These are leaders who've broken down barriers around the world and whose careers in public service have put them in rooms where the most consequential decisions about our community are made. I'm honored to introduce 3 new inductees this year. They are former Texas State Representative Glen Maxey, former Massachusetts State Senator Jarrett, Barrios, and California Senate President Pro Tem Toni Atkins. Now, I'm going to introduce each of them in turn. They're going to have an opportunity to come up and speak. We'll do a little picture, and at the end, we'll do a group photo of the inductees, and then I'm going to give the closing remarks of the conference. So we really are on the home stretch. We could say we saved the best for last, or we could say that it's a good time to reflect back on where we started, so that we can get ready to go where we need to be next. So, our first inductee is Glen Maxey. Glen is an educator and a politician, and he's been a prominent activist and leader in social justice for the last 50 years. In 1986, he gained national attention after successfully opposing the quarantine of individuals with HIV/AIDS in Texas, and subsequently founded the Lesbian Gay Rights Lobby of Texas, which is now Equality Texas, and it may have been the very first of the equality organizations in Texas. As its inaugural executive director, he advocated for HIV-related legislation and secured state funding for education and treatment. Then in 1991, Maxey made history as the first out LGBTQ plus person elected to the Texas House of Representatives. There, he sponsored numerous bills in health and human services during his 6-term tenure. Maxey continues his service through his work as a member of the Democratic National Committee. He has a particular passion for mentoring young people, and I will say very clearly that I'm so excited that Glen is here because I wouldn't be where I am here without Glen Maxey mentoring me back in the day. State Representative Glen Maxey.
I could stick around and get along with you. Hello, oh, oh, oh.
Thank you.
You're alright, but I'm your darling to enjoy the party. Don't get too excited, 'cause that's all you get from me. Hey.
Thank you, Anise, and thank you to the Victory Institute for this honor. For those of us who are sort of in the twilight of our years of activism, this is very, very meaningful to me. I am on about page 400 of a memoir. I'm not going to read it to you today. But I'm going to tell you a short story about how I came to this work almost 40 years ago. I was 30 years old. I had landed my dream job working as legislative aide at the Texas Senate. I was a political activist in the Democratic Party. And of course, in 1985, HIV and AIDS were raging on the coast, and it had come to Texas. I was totally closeted, and I made my first venture out by becoming a buddy to the first 2 men in Austin who had HIV and AIDS, to care for them and work with them until they died. At that point in time, the Commissioner of Health in Texas, General Robert Bernstein, it tells you a little bit about the man, was asked in a news conference what he was going to do about gay people in Texas spreading AIDS. And he said, I think I'm going to have the Board of Health make it a quarantinable offense. The quarantine statute in Texas had been written in 1919 for tuberculosis and the influenza epidemic. It said that anybody suspected of having a disease could be arrested and locked up and held until they were no longer infectious. You can imagine what gay men in Texas were thinking at that announcement, other than the fact that we sort of gallows humor said, well, if we can take over Padre Island, maybe so. That's a joke. And so when that happened, as a legislative aide, our phone started ringing in our office from gay activists in Dallas. Senator Maxey, my boss, represented Oak Lawn. And they asked, can the senator do anything to stop this? And that evening, when I met with the senator to go over the day's things that had occurred, it was during happy hour. And as usual, he was sitting and drinking scotch and smoking a cigar. And I told him about this epidemic of AIDS and the quarantine proposal, and that our constituents had been calling. He said to me, what do you think we ought to do about it? And I said, well, somebody ought to organize the opposition at the health department. The senator took a big swig of whiskey, put out his cigar and said, young man, when somebody needs to do something like that, that's going to be you. Now, from my closet, with no gay organizations, no AIDS organizations, no one even working on AIDS policy in Texas, I had 2 weeks to organize a hearing on this quarantine proposal. I found about 20 witnesses. I made a cold call to Dr. Mathilde Krim at Sloan Kettering, the lead AIDS researcher in the nation, who had just testified by Congress, and asked her if she would fly down at her expense to testify as my lead witness, and she did. The Board of Health, at the end of the hearing, decided to withdraw the proposal and send it to a recommendation to the legislature to rewrite the quarantine proposal so that it would have due process. It was a great victory. And I walked into the foyer of the Texas Health Department and saw 3 TV cameras, ABC, CBS, and NBC. Dr. Krim had already left. All of my other witnesses wouldn't go on camera. And so I, as a legislative aide, stood before national news media and had my first press conference. I went home that night, stood in front of a TV, flipped the channel, and I landed on the CBS Evening News with Dan Rather. I don't really remember what I said, because all I could see on the screen when my picture came up was big yellow letters across my chest that said, Glen Maxey, gay activist. That night, I dealt with coming out to not only my mother, all my coworkers, and several tens of millions of Americans. Senator Maxey was retiring, and I had 6 job offers in the state Senate to continue in the next term as legislative aide for 6 different state senators. They were all withdrawn. And so what's the guy to do? Within a month, I had called together what gay activists we had around Texas, and we met in a living room of a friend's house in Austin, Texas, and we founded the Lesbian Gay Rights Lobby of Texas. Ms. Parker was a young lesbian in that meeting in the room where it happened. And so I sort of did this work for a couple years. In 1991, I decided to run for the legislature, and I won. By my second term in office, I was on the Public Health Committee overseeing the health department in Texas. And by my last term, I was on the Appropriations Committee writing the budget for the Public Health Committee. I have heard young people say over the last 40 years, or people of all ages say, things like, well, somebody ought to. Somebody ought to organize something, somebody ought to do something, somebody ought to run for office. And I've told every one of them, as Oscar Maxey told me, anytime somebody needs to do it, you're that somebody. And I want to thank all of y'all who do this work day in and day out for our community and build the community that we have today. I was at one of the first one of these meetings in Hollywood, West Hollywood, when there were 15 in this room of openly gay elected officials back in the day. We've come a long, long way, and we have a long way to go. Thank y'all very much.
Our next honoree is Jarrett Barrios, a champion for LGBTQ+ and reproductive rights, who has made his mark as a leader across the country. In 1998, he won his first election and served in the Massachusetts House of Representatives. He later served in the state Senate, making history as its first Latino and the first LGBTQ+ person to serve in the body. But interestingly, post-politics, Barrios has held many leadership roles that have been almost as impactful, or perhaps equally as impactful. He's been president of the Los Angeles County Human Relations Commission, CEO at GLAD, AA GLAD, CEO at the Red Cross of Massachusetts, and vice chair for Planned Parenthood Action Fund in New York. He is currently vice chair of the Covered California Board of Directors and on the executive committee of the Center on Law and Social Policy in Washington, D.C. There is absolutely life after politics. Jarrett Barrios.
Baby, my head and my heart, I told you carry me, yeah. Lost my mind in your arms. I go to extremes, yeah. When angels tell me run, and monsters calling out. My head and my heart are caught in between, yeah. La 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 la, la 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 la, la 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 la.
Good afternoon. I think we're all that's standing between, I'm all that's standing between you and our next governor of California, Toni Atkins. So I'm going to be quick, but I want to tell you a little story. And it's your predecessor's predecessor, a guy named Brian Bond. I don't know if anybody remembers Brian. So my story with the Victory Fund started with a call I had to make to Brian. I had done the Victory Fund Training Institute, which at the time was really rigorous. I haven't done it in a while. I don't know if it's still so tough. It put the fear of God in me. And so I started going out to fundraise. And people would ask, well, are you endorsed yet by the Victory Fund? Yeah, you did the training, but are they behind you? I knew I had to talk to Brian. This was 1998. This was before we called them blue states and red states. It was before we had our cell phones. So it was me on a landline, knowing that the Victory Fund had been responding in the last sort of election cycle to the wave of DOMAs, Defense of Marriage Acts, that had been across state legislatures in the country, really making the point that we had to be present and visible in those debates. But the problem for me was I was coming from Massachusetts. There was no DOMA fight in Massachusetts. And I thought the case I needed to make to Brian to get that endorsement was, well, I'm just going to put it on the table and say it's still important. So I got on the phone with him on the landline. Brian, Mr. Bond, I'm a candidate, I did your training, I know that we're not going to have a DOMA, but I still think, stop, Jarrett. We need candidates in those states to defend our basic rights, like stopping those constitutional amendments. But we also need places, we need spaces where we are present and can advance the dream of what our full equality looks like. We need places, we need candidates, we need elected officials who will file domestic partnership laws. Remember those things? Domestic partnership? Employment non-discrimination, trans bill of rights, these sorts of things that, no, they're not going to start in Idaho or Iowa, but they could start in a place like Massachusetts. And we need people in Idaho and Iowa and Texas. And that vision, that broad vision of what the Victory Fund stood for, always, to me, made the case, the sort of inclusive case, for why we needed to be visible and what was expected of us when we got there. And let me tell you, I got there, 95% of that job was getting potholes filled and fighting over education funding formulas. But now and again, the opportunity arose to make a difference, as it did in 2003 when Massachusetts became the first state through a court action to legalize marriage equality. And when that happened, you can bet the right wing took it where? To the legislature to amend the Constitution. And there the fight stood. And gosh, wasn't Brian right? Wasn't it fortunate that they had elected not just me at that point, but four of us, to carry that conversation back, to be visible. I had adopted 2 boys to tell my son's stories, my partner's stories, as my colleagues did. And we won it in Massachusetts because we were not just in the gallery, but on the floor, taking the fight back to the right. I love the fact that Brian saw that back in 1998. And it wasn't just Brian. It was all the other folks at the Victory Fund, because that's what it has stood for. And the other thing Brian did for me, and you might do this too, Mayor Parker, I don't know, he called me one day about 6 months after I got elected, Jarrett, we're doing an event in Des Moines, Iowa. We think we can elect somebody to the city council there, and we're going to do a fundraiser. And we need you to go. And yeah, it's on Labor Day weekend, but you're going to go, aren't you? Yes, I guess. And he taught me in that, because that was the first of about a dozen such events that I would do, trying to support others. He taught me not just the importance of getting elected, but then giving back to the Victory Fund to help the next generation. The Victory Fund is that glue. It is the glue between our own electoral ambitions and the community power we seek to build by bringing more with us and after us. And that, for me, has been the great reason I have supported and am so honored to be here with you today. It's been a while since I've been at a Victory Fund event. I want to say thank you for bringing me back, and thank you for giving me a little bit of your time today. It's an honor. Thank you. You were doing that with me. Thank you.
And the last honoree today, probably should figure out another way to say that, not the last honoree, but the third honoree for today. Toni Atkins is the current California State Senate President pro tempore and a lifelong advocate for LGBTQ+ and women's issues. She was first elected to the San Diego City Council in the year 2000 and later became the city's interim mayor. After serving, she was subsequently elected to the State Assembly. And after serving in the State Assembly for 4 years, Atkins was named Speaker in 2014, making history as the first lesbian Speaker of the House. She later ran a successful campaign for State Senate and assumed office in 2016. 2 years later, she became President pro tempore and made history as the first woman and the first LGBTQ+ person to lead the legislature's upper house. Risen to the top in both chambers in California, she must have absolutely mad cat-herding skills, I gotta say. A brilliant, brilliant legislator and leader. I do have to confess, and I probably should have told Toni this before she came up here, but she was very high on our list when we named our first 10 on our 30th anniversary of our Hall of Fame. It's like, no, let's not do Toni yet. She's not done yet. And in the subsequent years, she's always been high on the list. And I said, no, she's not done yet. And she was, there's been a strong sentiment to give her a Lifetime Achievement Award. Like, no, she's not done yet. Well, she's definitely not done yet. So she will get a Lifetime Achievement Award from us at some point. But today, she goes into our political Hall of Fame. Toni Atkins.
Just a sweet, sweet fantasy, baby. When I close my eyes, you know that take it. All I know is so deep in my taste. Oh, it's just a sweet, sweet fantasy, baby. There's so much in it. There's so much in it. And I want you so bad.
Well, hello, Victory family. It is quite an honor to be here with Glen. I can't wait to read his book. What an honor. He is a real trailblazer. And to Jarrett, my friend, Jennifer and I consider you a dear friend, and it's very good to see you again. I have to say, I've been a longtime fan of Mayor Parker's. I think she's incredible. She has led this organization, and this is the largest conference. I want to say congratulations to her and each of the boards and the Institute for this. I also am going to recognize an incredible person in her own right who has supported Victory for many decades, and that's her partner, Kathy Hubbard, who, in her own right, I remember in the early years, Glen, I wasn't here in 91, but in 93, I was here to support my mentor, Christine Kehoe, who's been inducted into the Hall of Fame. And I was introduced to Victory at that time, and I have to say, I stand here with such gratitude because the Victory family, really, I credit with changing the trajectory of San Diego and the politics and the community and what we've been able to do in San Diego. And we put a number of people from San Diego on the multiple boards. And I'm grateful because what San Diego looks like today, we have more out LGBTQ electeds and appointeds than many places across the country. And I credit the Victory family with helping us get started. And I would say not only did they change San Diego, but because of what we've been able to do, they changed the state of California. And I want to thank you for that. I want to thank you for that. Look, when I heard Mayor Parker speak yesterday, I sent her a text. I said, that was an incredible speech. I've heard her speak many times, but she really touched my heart because she talked about the state of our community and what we're doing and the work we've done, our successes, and what we have to do. And then, you know, I come here, I wasn't exactly paying attention, and then she pointed out the theme, you belong. I grew up in Southwest Virginia, about 6 hours down the road, 95 or 81. I was born in rural Southwest Virginia in a house with no running water. My parents were blue-collar working-class people. My dad was a lead miner and a coal miner. My mom was a garment worker. And a few years later, I came out as a lesbian. And everything told me that the world was not about me. I was clear. I still have the funny accent, right? I knew that the world was not about me. But frankly, it was my mentor, Chris Kehoe. It was access to education. Even though we didn't have health care and we didn't have enough money and we didn't have enough food, we were food insecure. It was access to education that gave me an opportunity in life, and everybody needs that access, everybody. And we're about that. It was California, my adopted home, that gave me the American dream and the opportunity, and it was Chris Kehoe, and it was Victory Fund. So what I've enjoyed most about Victory since '93 really has been your stories, because your stories, and listening even earlier today to the stories, our stories matter. And how our stories interact with each other, and how we inspire each other to know certainly that we belong. And not only do we belong, but we do the work, we organize, we work together so that I was no longer a victim. I was empowering myself, not to help others, but to be an example and to help other people be able to empower themselves. And when that is what we do, we change hearts, we change minds, and we change the world. And I want to thank you for this incredible honor. I want to thank you for being part of my family. I am a twin. I've always been a we. I played basketball. I'm a lesbian that played basketball. And I'm a part of this Victory family, and I am so honored, and I am just grateful. And I'm going to end with a different kind of thank you, which is, as we have listened to these great panels this afternoon, I have watched these incredible servers and staff at this hotel take care of us, and I want to thank them. I want to thank them for their service and taking care of us. Again, I want to thank Mayor Parker, and I want to say to all of you, we're going to continue to change the world because we know how to do it. Thank you.